Okay, I think we're ready. Okay. Wow, that was something. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Good
Hello, wonderful.
morning. I'm sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues trying to figure out this something new for us, which is translating the conversation into more than one language. So we hope that the Spanish speakers will be able to follow the conversation just as the English speakers can. Miriam Cruz, who you'll see that she's just waved, is our official translator for the evening, and I want to thank her and um, and thank her for making sure that everything is going smoothly. All right. Anyway, welcome to the Journalism's Roundtable. My name is Richard Prince, and I write an online column called Journal-isms. That's journal-isms.com on diversity issues in the news business. And this roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999 when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. He said, keep these going, and we have. We've met we met every month in various restaurants in Washington, D.C. until the COVID pandemic when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and we hope to have more roundtables that are hybrid, meeting in person as well as having people attend via Zoom. We've had 3 of those so far. We think of this as an online dinner party with the purpose to network and to learn. Some of the networking takes place in the chat room, so please feel free to make use of it. You can email people individually or send a message to the whole group. Special message to those on Facebook. Please leave messages in the comments section if you want to reach us. And later on, this will be available on YouTube. So this is a greeting to them too. We see such a multicultural, diverse crowd here. It's really inspiring. So I want to start off. Our topic is Cuba, victim or villain or both. And I want to start off with a video, a very short video made by the Committee to Protect Journalists when it presented its Press Freedom Award of the year last year, 2022, to Abraham Jimenez Inoa, who is a Cuban journalist who fled to Spain, and he was the recipient last year. And they made this video. So, Jackie, let's show that briefly.
No puedes hacer periodismo sin ir contra el poder. No estar con mi familia, no saber cuándo volveré a pisar mi país. Pero yo creo que todo eso, amén que me golpea, me hace como más fuerte, ¿no? Si todo eso sucede, hay que contar todo eso. Me siento comprometido con contar esa realidad que mucha gente desconoce de Cuba.
In Cuba from about 2014, there was a little bit more access to the internet, and it really opened up whole new avenues of expression and of opportunity for reporting that simply weren't available to people. Abraham Jimenez Inoa is one of the pioneers of this new generation of Cuban journalists. He wanted to talk about issues that the Cuban government didn't want to be covered.
Yo y mi generación somos unos suertudos porque contamos con el arma de internet. El Estornudo es la primera revista de periodismo narrativo que se hizo en Cuba. Internet generó que naciera una sociedad civil nueva en Cuba. El gobierno cubano se dio cuenta que el país se le estaba yendo de las manos. El Estornudo fue, si no el primero, uno de los primeros que bloquearon.
Life in Cuba for many reporters and activists is characterized by arbitrary privacy violations.
Abraham's case is really emblematic of the different types of harassment that independent Cuban journalists face.
Comenzaron a intervenirme en mi comunicación privada, a acosar a mi familia, a mis amigos, me dejaban en prisión domiciliaria, me secuestraban en la calle, me desnudaron, me metieron en un carro y yo no sabía hacia dónde iba. Justo unos meses antes, el Post me había hecho columnista, ¿no? Y ellos no querían que yo siguiera escribiendo ahí. Y me dijeron que si volvía a escribir ahí, me iban a llevar a la cárcel.
Instead of following those instructions, what he did was wrote about that experience in the Post so that everyone would know exactly what had happened to him.
This weekend, thousands of Cubans took part in widespread anti-government protests that ended with hundreds of arrests.
It was one of the country's biggest anti-government demonstrations in decades.
A partir de las protestas, el gobierno cubano tomó la decisión de exiliar a toda la sociedad civil cubana. Me llamaron por teléfono y me dijeron que si no me iba a ir ya realmente a la cárcel, que iban a acabar con mi familia. Al tener una familia, al tener sobre mis hombros esa responsabilidad, tomé la decisión de salir. Yo la estaba pasando muy mal a nivel de salud mental y me quedé sin que nadie me atendiera. No tuve alternativas que escribirle a los del CPJ y ellos me financiaron una terapeuta online y gracias a eso pude salir del hueco en el que estaba.
Nobody wants to leave their entire life behind. This is a real problem, both as we think about who is left to tell the stories in the places that journalists are leaving, but also whether they're going to be able to continue working in that field.
Fue muy duro el aterrizaje. No tenía ganas de escribir, no tenía cabeza para escribir nada. Y encontré la solución de darle un vuelco a todo eso y es escribir justamente todo lo que me está pasando, ¿no? Y en eso estoy. Los periodistas seguimos contando lo que podemos de afuera y de adentro. No es que nos desterraron y que ya bajamos las armas.
Okay, and I want to thank CPJ for making that, and that's a good way for us to start out. Now, I'm trying to see whether we have all the who of our speakers is here and ready to begin. I also wanted to tell everybody that everything we say here is on the record. Ask that people be respectful of other people's time and keep their comments and questions brief. Of our speakers, I want people to respond to the question we asked at the beginning, which is Cuba a victim or a villain or both? Now we have some. I guess everybody should have received a message that our friend Julio, who was down in Havana, sent me yesterday, and I asked him to put that in writing in case he couldn't connect, because the internet service in Cuba is sporadic, especially if you're not among the favored class. So I don't see him, but you all have that comment, and we can just move on from there. So let's see. I see Rocio Baro, who is here. I met her as she's one of the Hubert Humphrey Fellows at Arizona State University, and she is from Cuba. And I'll ask her to start off then. What are your thoughts within no more than 3 minutes, Rocio?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy and honored to be here in this roundtable. I believe that Cuba is both a victim and a villain. Lately, it has been more a villain than a victim, especially for not only for journalists, but for whoever that is able to think freely in Cuba. And for the people that are like that they are not afraid anymore, and they are starting to speak freely about what they are experiencing, about what they are living, because the situation is beyond logic and is beyond anything that you can imagine. It's not that, I mean, it was always kind of, it was weird. Cuba is a very complex country. It's very difficult to describe for the people that don't know how we live or don't know our reality, because it's very complex. I think that a very quick way to describe Cuba right now is telling people, yes, go and do tourism in Cuba, but please bring a suitcase with donations. If you're going to have fun in a country, you don't want to see people, or you are not thinking about going to some place to help because you are going on vacation. So that's kind of the reality and the complexity of the country. It's a very beautiful country. The people are amazing, but we are in pain because even us that we are not in Cuba anymore, we live in a sort of limbo where we don't know if we are going to be able to go back at any time. We don't know when we are going to see our families again. So we live in a limbo. We don't belong to the places we live right now, but the place that we left that was called home doesn't exist anymore. So when you live in that reality, in that situation, your whole life is very difficult. And it's very difficult to explain to other people. And Abraham's situation is not strange to me. I graduated from the same faculty, that is the Faculty of Communication of Havana University. And then I was a professor there for 5 years. And I didn't only have to see my fellow classmates being persecuted or being incarcerated. I also get to the point to see my students going through that. After 2020, I left. I went to a Chieftain scholarship, but a lot of my students that were course in journalism were persecuted as well. And they experienced the same thing that Abraham was describing. They were called to their houses and they was like, you have only 3 choices. You can stop making journalism, you can leave the country, or you can go to prison. And the other one is, for leaving the country, you have to renounce everything that you have said. You have to say that everything that you say was paid by the US government. And we know that as journalists, the only thing that we have, I'm not a journalist, but all my friends are, and I've been around, like, I don't know, I've been sharing rooms and spaces with journalists for 10 years of my life. So you know, if you're a journalist, the only thing that you have is your credibility. So if you go on national television, and here in Cuba, all the media are controlled by the state. All the independent media are banned, are forbidden. Actually, they approved the law of communication in 2022, and again, independent media are out of the question. In the Cuban constitution says that the only media that can exist in Cuba need to be owned by the state. So if you go on national television, you don't have any other space to reply. That's the only space you have. That's the only thing that you have that people are going to see in Cuba. But I'm talking about the general population. So it's very difficult to make a comeback as a journalist when you go on national television and you say, everything I said was paid by the US government. Because it's that or your freedom, or it's that or your life. So putting people in that situation is very difficult. And the other thing that I want to address, since I have only like 3 minutes, is the embargo. Yes, it's real. Yes, it exists. But it's not what the Cuban government has been saying for 16 years. Because the US embargo has a lot of loopholes. The United States is kind of like the main provider of food for Cuba. We buy like more than 50% of our food from the United States. So that's happening now. Cuba trades with more than 100 countries in the world. So where is that embargo? Yes, of course, it makes everything more difficult for Cuba, but also not allowing people to have like their own business. On, I don't know, the first time that Cuba were allowed to have their own business was around 2010. So they had that space closed for like 50 years because they were fighting against people acquiring money. They didn't want people to be rich. They wanted this distribution, this equal distribution of money on richness. So Cuba, they had like these main two let's call it achievements. That one is that education is free and healthcare is also free. And they were able to create a very strong healthcare system because, of course, from 1961 to 1991, they were receiving money from the for the Soviet Union. And also they had a lot of construction, a lot of buildings and a lot of infrastructure that they inherited, for saying in a way, from the capitalism system that was in Cuba since 1959. If you see all the main hospitals in Cuba, all of those hospitals, those buildings were made by the US government when they were like kind of owning Cuba in a very weird way that it wasn't legal, it wasn't true, but they were there. Cuba was the backyard. So they were building a lot of things in Cuba. Cuba was either the second Las Vegas or the second New York. So all the main hospitals in Cuba were built by the US government. They didn't build that. They were receiving a lot of money, a lot of donations from the Soviet Union, sorry. The English kind of gets me confused. So they didn't have to invest money in that. And then Fidel was so smart that he saw the healthcare system in Cuba as a business. And that was the main line of revenue in Cuba for many years. It was just providing medical services for international countries. So yes, Cuba had a very strong healthcare system, but it was also a big business. And when you made the question, where is that money? Where did that money go?
Okay.
How come in 2020, and this is my ending, in 2020, almost half of the Cuban inversion went to the tourists. 2020. COVID was hitting hard and they decided to invest only in tourists, not in health. So yeah, Cuba, for me, it has been a victim because yeah, the embargo has been there for 60 years, but right now it's more like a villain. More a villain than a victim.
Okay, thank you very much. I see Darcy is here, Darcy Barrero. She is a journalist and human rights defender who is part of a cross-border investigation in 19 countries, including Cuba. Violence During a Quarantine was the name of that investigation. It just won a One World Media Award. And I'd like to have Darcy step up and answer the same question. Victim, villain, or both?
Yeah, hello, and thank you for inviting me to this space, but I prefer speaking Spanish because it's too complex to explain the Cuban situation. In English, it's hard. So I will speak Spanish.
That's why we have Miriam Cruz here, our translator.
Okay, perfect. Entonces, en español, me gusta mucho que comencemos problematizando esta situación de Cuba. La pregunta es interesante, aunque también puede caer en el maniqueísmo y seguirle un poco la narrativa a lo que ha sido, a lo que ha seguido el régimen cubano, y yo sí voy a remarcarlo como régimen, como dictadura en cualquier espacio, en este y en todos.
Okay, now do you have to pause so that Miriam can translate?
Yes. Okay. Rocío, un favor, si puedes pausar cada 3 o 4 frases para que yo pueda traducir lo que estás diciendo, ¿está bien?
Okay, now what did she say for the English speakers?
Okay, what she said is that she feels that she's feeding into the narrative with this question that she has not answered the full question. She feels that she's the question is being a problematical question, trying to get into the narrative of the country, more or less. I lost a little bit.
All right, so
Something
speak
like
in short,
that.
short
Okay.
sound bites then, please, Darcy.
Thank you.
Yeah, Darcy, if you give me a few words. Okay.
Ya. Entonces, sí, la narrativa a lo largo de estos más de 60 años, desde la parte cubana, desde la parte gubernamental, por supuesto, ha sido siempre la de victimizarse. Ha sido cómodo recurrir a esta narrativa del David contra el Goliat, de que un gran Estado está ejerciendo presión.
Stop.
Okay. Yes, I want to elaborate into the narrative of these 60 years that the Cuban government has been playing the victim. It has been something very easy trying to do that and playing the David versus Goliath situation.
Sí,
Go ahead.
y bueno, como decía Rocío también, hay mucho en ese embargo que es digamos, el núcleo principal de esa narrativa de víctima que ha tomado siempre el papel fundamental en la narrativa del régimen. Pues Estados Unidos ha tenido un papel central, como decía, y el embargo es clave en este sentido.
As I have said that the embargo is the nucleus of this whole narrative where the government is playing this role, that it's a fundamental role as a victim, where the U.S. plays a central part of it in the whole narrative. Adelante.
Sí. El contexto en el que surgió el embargo es muy distinto también al contexto actual. Habría que analizarlo desde aquella etapa y las compensaciones que dejaron de hacerse cuando se nacionalizó casi prácticamente todo en Cuba. Todas las instituciones, las empresas.
Yes, okay, give me a moment. It would have to, this embargo should be looked at from a context, historical context, because we would have to analyze what happened back then 60 years ago and how it's been, how it has been working as of now, because back then, as you remember, all the companies and all the businesses, every single institution was nationalized back then. Go ahead.
Entonces, en este nuevo contexto, digamos en 2023, cuando ya han pasado tantos años, han cambiado muchas cuestiones en el país, y desde los años 90 hay espacios en ese embargo, a partir también de las leyes Torricelli, Helms-Burton, y estas...
Since if after so many years in 2023, many of the situations have changed since the 90s with the Hertz-Torricello law that was issued. Go ahead.
Sí, entonces, por ejemplo, con estas leyes se dejaron espacios abiertos y un sector en el que esto se puede ver profundamente es en el de las telecomunicaciones.
For example, some of the places where you can see that that some areas were left open was the telecommunications.
Sí, entonces en el sector de las telecomunicaciones, que es el que más yo he investigado, por ejemplo, Estados Unidos es el país en el top 10 de países de donde llega el dinero a Cuba por concepto de telecomunicaciones. Estados Unidos es el primero en este sentido.
So what I have been investigating more in my career it's been the telecommunication sector, where you can see that the USA has been one of the top 10 countries that has been contributing money to the system in Cuba.
Y bueno, también esto toma un papel importante el exilio cubano, pues sabemos que gran parte de la población cubana fuera del país se encuentra en Estados Unidos y particularmente en Miami. Y somos los exiliados, también los proveedores de la población que queda en la isla, recargamos los móviles. Esto es un poco más complejo de explicar así en detalle, pero sí, gran parte del dinero proviene también de estas recargas y que las provee, por supuesto, el propio cubano que se exilia.
Okay. This is a very important role also played by the exile population that lives now in Cuba. Uh, uh, the majority of them living in Miami. And this is a little complex to explain how these people that live in exile are the ones providing the Cuban population with money to pay, for example, to recharge their mobile phones and paying for the recharging. It's a little complex to understand or to explain in detail.
Sin embargo, esto me lleva a hablar del exilio y de por qué hay que entender también a este exilio que a lo largo de décadas ha padecido fundamentalmente la separación familiar, el encarcelamiento, los fusilamientos desde el propio comienzo de la Revolución Cubana, y ese sentimiento de que Cuba no es víctima, sino victimario. Es comprensible que exista y que prevalezca desde esta parte, desde el exilio cubano.
So, however, the exile also has to, you have to understand that they have been suffering and experiencing separation from their families. They have suffered through people being shot at, feeling more as the victims and not as the villains. Is that what you said? Yes.
Yeah. Y bueno, me gustaría finalizar con que hoy por hoy, después del estallido social del 11 de julio de 2021, pues cientos de personas permanecen todavía encarceladas por motivos políticos. Se ha usado el delito de sedición para procesar a estas personas, y de lo que siempre hablo, que es del barrio donde yo viví, 96 vecinos del barrio donde yo viví fueron procesados por el delito de sedición, que en cualquier contexto es un delito políticamente motivado.
I wanted to finish my contribution by saying that after the protest of the July 11 in 2021, more than hundreds of people were still remain in custody with the government in prison, accused of sedition. They have been processed like that. Just in my neighborhood, 96 people in my neighborhood are being accused of sedition, which in a way is a big crime.
Ok, entonces me disculpo un poco por lo fragmentado del discurso, porque los ritmos de la traducción, o sea, preferiría poder hacerlo en inglés, pero me siento más cómoda explicándolo en español, que es mi idioma, mi lengua materna. Gracias, África.
I apologize for having fragmented my contribution, but it would have. I feel more comfortable talking in Spanish, which is my first language, than in English. Thank you so much
no
for
worries.
the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Gracias, gracias. All right, I want to ask Dagmar Thiel now to give us her interpretation of what's been going on. Dagmar is the CEO of Fondo de Dios, and that is an organization for press freedom in Latin America. And we first met when she had a panel discussion at the National Press Club with people from various countries in Latin America, Cuba, Venezuela, and was it Nicaragua? I can't remember the third one, Guatemala, perhaps. And I'd like to get her to put this in the broader context for us, and also to answer the question, villain or victim or both. Dagmar.
Thank you, Richard, for having me here. It's really wonderful to see so many wonderful people on this roundtable, and it's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much. And of course, I have not experienced what Darcy or Rocio have experienced, and they know it firsthand how a repressive regime violates daily the human rights in the island. I think that places Cuba on the side of the villain, because with the economic blockage, you can be a victim, but choosing to violate daily the human rights of your citizens is to be a villain. And the Cuban dictatorship is doing this every day more often, and it's really tightening all the civil voices in the island. We can remember that 2 years ago, in July 2021, there were huge protests that were asking for more liberty, and they used the internet access to do this and to gather together. After those protests, many people were arrested. We have almost 1,000 people who are detained right now, and among them, many journalists. The detention conditions are severe. People are suffering very severe health conditions. For example, we have a journalist, Lázaro Yuri Valle, whose wife recently explained 2 weeks ago that she's really concerned about his life. He has a sentence for about 20 years for sedition. As Darcy explained, that's happening to many citizens. But we have also a lot of journalists from Cuba that are now in exile. There are more than 90 journalists that ICLEP, which is an organization from Cuba that reports about freedom of expression, has reported that they went into exile in 2022. We don't have the exact number for 2023, but they must be more than 100 journalists or citizens who tried to make journalism in Cuba, because we have to remember that it's prohibited to have a different voice than the official government voice. As Fundamedios, we also supported 2 journalists to be granted asylum in the US, but they were previously held in ICE detention facilities for almost a year. Those were Serafin Moran and Juan Ramon Ramirez. Both of them entered the US and applied for asylum, but were held in detention. I thought Serafin would be here. I would have loved to see him because it was really hard to get those asylum claims to be approved. On the other hand, what's happening in Cuba and going away with this severe human rights violation is also going through the rest of the region. We are having the Nicaraguan government just doing the same practices of suppressing the opinion of their citizens or detaining people. Even, you may know, most of you, this year, the beauty queen, the Miss Universe, was a Nicaraguan. She was banned from going back home, because she was wearing her white dress and the blue scarf, remembering the flag of Nicaragua. So what's happening in Cuba, it's going to the rest of the country, of the region. We are having authoritarian practices in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, and of course, not only in left-leaning governments, but also right-leaning governments as Guatemala. And we are seeing that these practices are being imitated also in the Bolsonaro regime in Brazil, that it was finished right now, but we are seeing that this is spreading. And this is the terrible situation of being a human rights violator and a villain for their citizen. So that will be my first intervention, Richard, if it's okay.
Thank you very much. We're going to pause now. We've got some people are still having some technical difficulties in getting in, but I want to see whether there are any questions for the people who have already spoken. Anybody have a question for those who've already spoken?
Yes, I have a question.
Who is this? I can't see who's speaking.
Sorry, it's Milton.
Oh, Milton. Okay, go ahead, Milton, please.
All right. First of all, thank you.
Tell everybody who you are.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes.
My name is Milton Alimadi. I publish Black Star News here in New York City. It's sort of a Pan-African news outlet, focusing news for African Americans, Caribbean immigrants, and African immigrants as well. And I teach African history at John Jay College and journalism at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. So thank you so much, Richard, for hosting this conversation. I have a broad question because I think it would address a lot of the issues also for any one of the speakers or for all of them. In their view, what model or what government would they see as best for the Cuban people? So if you were to draw your best wish kind of scenario, what type of government would you think would be ideal for Cuba, knowing its history? And then, of course, when you say that, you're addressing the issue of the politics and the economics as well. I know it's a very broad question, but I think it allows us to answer a lot of things. Because sometimes when you hear people talking about Cuba and describing the challenging situation, the economic conditions, the human rights violations, people don't put it in a historical context. So it's as if Cuba one day just became the Cuba that we see today. So I think that's, of course, a very important issue as well. So then knowing the history, what would you, in your view, be an ideal type of system in Cuba? Any one of you.
I'm gonna go first. First of all, that's the $1 million question. And I don't think, for me, the only answer is we want a democratic government. Plain. Just that. One that is democratic, one that we choose, one that we are there to help navigate the difficulties of our country. One government that is open. And if we say, hey, you know what? I've been working in this for 20 years and I don't think you should make this huge pivot economical change right now, please listen. A government when you are able to say, you know what, you're the president, but you are doing this and that wrong, and you're not facing jail. A government that is open to negotiate, but not based on their very own needs and what they are there to gain, but they are thinking about the people, and they are listening to the people. 11 July 2021 was the Cuban people saying, we are done. We cannot keep this way. We are the ones suffering. We have no food. We have not electric power. We have no clean water. We have no medicine. It breaks my heart every time I open my Facebook account and I see people asking for something as simple as an Advil for their kids with a fever. And the answer, the plain answer of the Cuban government in national television was, the streets are for the ones that are with the revolution. And that was a civil war. And was the government the one who started violence? So we want a democratic and open government. We don't know how it's gonna look. We don't know any idea what politics that may be. We just want a government that it was like Martí, the national hero of Cuba, say, with everyone and for the good of everyone. And that's the only way. And the only way of doing that is democracy. It's just saying, this is the government we want, but we don't have that right now. And if you ask most of the Cuban population right now, the government they have is not the government they want. And we didn't choose that government. So for me, it's that democratic.
All right, thank you for that answer. I just want to qualify it a little bit. So for example, would it be like the kind of system we have in the United States or the kind of system we have in Sweden, for example? Because I think it's important in terms of income distribution as well. It's one thing to have the open elections, competitive political parties, which of course most of us support, I myself support, but then some people would have issues if the income distribution becomes something like what we see in the United States. So that's why I was asking, in your mind, you know, what would you, but maybe your colleagues can also address the same question.
I mean, in the situation that we are right now, I don't think we have the space to be thinking about income or maybe if the government should look like the one in the US or like the one in Switzerland, because we are right now in trying to survive. That's what really happening in Cuba. people are trying to survive. And someone was asking if these are no water, no medicine, no food was because of the US embargo, and it's not. It's just bad management and corruption. So that's what I was saying, that half of the Cuban inversions in 2020 went to the tourist sector that only and directly benefits the Cuban government because they are owned by Gaesa, that Gaesa is just a cover for the Castro family. So Gaesa controls 95% of Cuban finances, and they are the ones that are deciding where to invest, and they are not investing in education like they used to, in health like they used to. They are only investing in hotels. So when you go to Cuba and you see the situation of the people in Cuba, and then you see a brand new hotel that is opening every 6 months in Havana, and those hotels are empty, you don't understand. So right now, I don't think we are thinking in what model we want. We want one model that is open, that will allow us to, you know, in an ideal system, someone with a lot of money would say, like, you know what, I'm a philanthropist, I want to save and help this country, I'm going to buy the island for the Cuban people. So you are going to start over again, because the issue is so broad and so big that it's systemic. You cannot say, hey, I'm going to save health in Cuba. You are not going to solve anything. You need a clean sheet, and I don't know, it's not my field of expertise. I don't even know what it takes. I know that we need to start by changing what we have right now, and then we will see what we can do. But right now, that money doesn't exist, that will, that doesn't exist. If the Cuban government is out of question tomorrow, you can rest assured that when you go to the National Bank, you will find no money.
Okay, thank you. Serafin may have had a problem, Serafin Moran, in joining us, but fortunately, we had a conversation this morning, and he talked about the plight of independent journalists, and so did Julio Antonio Rojas, whose statement we published and distributed yesterday. I'll just read just briefly what Julio said about that. He said, today in Cuba, the situation of many independent journalists, among whom I am, is unsustainable to maintain. We lack food, medicine, and jobs in addition to journalism with which we can support ourselves. If for the simple Cuban of civil society who is supporting the regime is difficult, imagine the situation of independent and opposition journalists. In some cases, the family supports them and supports them as much as they can. In other cases, there's no applause because they are divided and do not support the opposition family member. It is very hard and unsustainable. The situation of some independent journalists, in which I include myself, in addition to that, we are followed by the political police. They threaten us with long prison sentences if we do not abandon journalism, yet we continue writing and publishing the abuses and violations of the regime. Now, this morning, in my conversation with Serafin, he mentioned the fact that some of the Cuban journalists, independent journalists, would like to have work because they're being frozen out of so much of it in Cuba. And I mentioned that the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, for example, has the Palabra program, which publishes works in Spanish as well as in English, but of particular interest to expressing the viewpoint of Latinos. And then the National Association of Black Journalists also has a new program. I guess it's been around for a year or two to provide work for Black journalists. So I urged him to get in touch with those organizations. And people on this call may have other suggestions, which they're free to put in the chat. Now, I see a number of hands. I see Rebecca Aguilar. I see Wesley Gibbings. Dagmar is back. And Julie tries it. I'm going back from Spanish to English. And Roger Witherspoon. So let's take them in that order. Rebecca, you're first.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for this roundtable. I'm going to ask this in Spanish and English. Darcy, Rocio y Dagmar, gracias porque están aquí con nosotros y los están diciendo todo lo que está pasando en Cuba. Lo que quería preguntar es cómo podemos, como periodistas aquí en los Estados Unidos, apoyar y ayudar a los periodistas en Cuba, porque nosotros estamos aquí, a veces pensamos, ¿qué podemos hacer? Yo sé que hay periodistas allá en Cuba que están escondidos, están tratando de, claro, reportar lo que está pasando, pero por favor, necesitamos las sugestiones de ustedes. Let me ask this in English. I was just asking them, how can we as journalists in the United States support and help the journalists in Cuba right now? Because sometimes we feel that we're here, but we can't do anything. And sometimes because there is a language barrier, but what can we do in the United States as journalists ourselves to help those in Cuba who may be in hiding and reporting, but are trying to do the job? So por favor, sus mensajes para nosotros, please, any suggestions to us would help. Gracias.
Bueno, yo puedo responder primero también, gracias por la pregunta. Y bueno, en primer lugar, por lo que siempre hemos apostado, al menos desde mi experiencia, es por tejer redes que cada vez estén más visibles. Como decías, hay periodistas que lamentablemente tienen que operar más desde el silencio, porque si no, realmente no pueden hacer su trabajo. Pero a la larga lo que se ha demostrado es que el alto perfil puede ser mucho más efectivo para que se pueda seguir haciendo el trabajo y llevar adelante, de hecho, investigaciones, porque una vez que hay un foco puesto sobre una persona, sobre varios periodistas, es más complejo que el régimen pueda llegar a reprimirlos con más fuerza. Y también, además de estas redes, pues siempre tratar de contar lo que está pasando en Cuba, incluso las experiencias de estos periodistas, sistematizarlas, hacer reportajes.
Stop.
Oh, okay.
I can translate that if you want.
Yes, please, Miriam.
No, I think that was Rocio, right?
Yeah.
Rocio, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, what she was saying is mostly what the independent journalists in Cuba, their main approach is trying to build networks with people that can help spread the word. And the other thing is helping those journalists, because some of the journalists need to go like lay down, but it has been proved that it's more effective if you are like a high profile journalist and people follow you a little more, because that also offers protection for the journalists sometimes. And the other thing that she was saying is just being an advocate, telling the story, telling what's happening, doing your own research, finding your own sources, and just understanding a little better the situation of the country, and just telling your platform, your network, what's happening in Cuba, so we can all report what is happening and just make an impact.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Wesley. Wesley, I'm so glad that you're here. Wesley is one of the winners of the NABJ Percy-Caboza Award, which goes to a foreign journalist, and he's down in Trinidad, where he's been a long time journalist. But today he's in Germany.
Yes. Yeah. And
I'm glad our time zone was able to accommodate you.
Yes. Thanks a lot. Yeah, not the best weather for a Caribbean person. I'm using that background in the hope that it will shed a little bit of warmth. Now knowing where I come from, I think that the perspective we bring in the Caribbean is a lot different from most other territories. CARICOM last year celebrated 50 years of diplomatic relations with Cuba. There's very much a strong sense of fraternity with Cuba. There is an acute knowledge of the nuances that you need to engage in terms of resolving the problems of Cuba. We have had experiments in the Caribbean that have been aligned to what people witnessed in '59 in Cuba that have all failed. You've had a situation in Jamaica in the 70s. We had Grenada 79 to 1983. So we very much know how problematic that type of model is in our context. But I'm always very hesitant about adopting a position of good guy, bad guy. I think you will find that because of the strong sense of fraternity, CARICOM as a grouping, for example, has been meeting steadily with Cuba on a formal basis over the past 20 years. There's a Cuba CARICOM summit that takes place on a regular basis. We have been accused many times of coddling, of horsing around with tyrants. The accusation extends not only to Cuba, but to other organizations, to other countries that we have decided to make our friend. There are a lot of countries that are losing moral authority on this question of democracy nowadays, by the way. I mean, Europe and the Netherlands has taken a step via free and fair elections to put a right-wing racist, xenophobic government in place. I think that we have, in the Caribbean, bring up the kind of eye that dissects these issues far more acutely than other countries that see themselves as having a paternalistic relationship with the rest of the world. It is not that there isn't recognition of all that has been said before. Though on the question of the embargo, you'll find that Cuba has been backed by the CARICOM region for a very long time. Every time the resolution on the embargo comes up, the CARICOM countries make a determined effort to raise objection to it. I mean, I heard what Rocio said, but if the embargo was anything anything but symbolic, then the U.S. government would not have persisted in it for so long. Otherwise, it would be absolutely ridiculous if the country could survive and function as normal in the case of an embargo. All of this is not a defense of anything. It's just a matter of a sense of fraternity. Because of the sense of fraternity, we are acutely aware of the problems of race in Cuba, because as Black countries, we share a strong sense of solidarity, and we are fully aware that Cuba has never, ever, from day one, preceding the revolution, and now come to terms with the fact of its diversity. It has been one of the problematic areas in terms of our relationship in the Caribbean with Cuba. But I am always uncomfortable with the kind of framing of the topic of Cuba along the lines of good guys, bad guys, or somewhere in between. There's a lot of in between, and there's a lot of things, perspectives on the spectrum that exceed the good guy, bad guy label that we put on things.
Okay, thank you. On the question of race in Cuba, I heard from Eugene Robinson last night, who is a columnist at the Washington Post, who covered Latin America and wrote a book about, I think, Last Tango in Havana and also Cold to Cream. And he forwarded to me a piece that he wrote about race in Cuba, which I have put in the version of the message we got yesterday on the journalism site. So if you go to the Journalism Roundtable tab, you'll see a link to his column written in 2000, and he wonders how much has changed. And Wesley has just given us a little of that. So let me go on to Julie Dreisen, who had a question or a statement.
Thanks. My name's pronounced Julie Dreisen.
Dreisen, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm the executive director of Current, which is a trade publication for people who work in public media here in the U.S., and which is part of the School of Communications at American University. I've gone to Cuba. It was more than a decade ago. I went on a trip with my mother that was sponsored by a Canadian-Cuban organization. It was considered a people-to-people kind of tour, and I think we had access to some things that other tourists wouldn't have. It was a group of educators, and I could sort of fit in as an educator because I was teaching at the University of Maryland at the time, even though I was on staff. But my question to the journalists, we sort of talked about how we can help. When I went, I didn't go as a journalist. I didn't bring recording equipment, even though I'm a radio person. didn't take notes and it didn't interview anybody, but it had a lot of questions for people that an educator might ask. Thinking about taking my daughters to Cuba to have the experience of visiting the island. And I'm wondering whether or not the journalists there are, encouraging tourism in any way, shape, or form, or, hoping that people will sort of boycott the tourism industry there because it is, basically shaving all the revenue that could be going towards helping people. If you think tourism is okay, is it possible for there to be any level of humanitarian mission aid, Advil brought in for people and other things, and whether or not people who visit can distribute that in any way? So should I go? Should we go? And if we do go, can we bring anything in?
Okay, who wants to answer that one?
I can do it.
Okay, please do.
Maybe, and also, I don't know if Darcy's still here, but I would like to hear what she has to say, because I have the feeling that she may disagree with me, and that's okay. Cubans, we tend to kind of get a hold of the situation by who was the last to leave the country, because the scenes are changing by the minute. I don't know. Cuba is a safe country for tourists because Cubans are not allowed to carry guns, and the level of violence is not compared to Mexico, but it's getting more violent because the situation is getting more difficult, and people can find what they need to live in the same way that they used to 3-4 years ago. Should you go? If you want to, yes, but I always say to people, don't go to hotels. If you want to go to Cuba, go and rent an Airbnb, because that money will be helping a Cuban, and no, that money won't go to the government. Because if you go to the hotel and if you go to a place state ruled, you will be helping the dictatorship in Cuba. So yeah, but if you go to a private business, then you will be helping a Cuban person. And it's what I was saying in the beginning, is the situation in Cuba is so complex that you are going to have a vacation, to have like a relaxation time, but you will encounter people that are in extreme need. So it's very complicated going on vacation with a suitcase full of donations, like basic medicine, basic hygiene products, food that won't get wasted, like canned food or things like that. It's very, very complicated to be thinking on that, because if you're going to Cancun, you are thinking about, oh, the beach is so beautiful, I'm going to have a nice time. Maybe if you live in Washington or New York, you're thinking about the weather and not being in the cold. Taking a lot of nice pictures and having a great moment. And you can have that in Havana, but also in the way, and I have never been to Cancun, and maybe if you go to Cancun, you will experience the same thing. But in the way of having fun and having relaxation, you will face the reality of Cuba, because you cannot erase that. And if you go to Havana, it doesn't matter if you're staying in a fancy house that is owned by some private person with money, you will see the Cuban reality in the streets, and that's going to make an impact on you. So if you want to go, because the best way of really telling what's happening in Cuba is making people see it. So just go, but try to make that trip the best that you can for the Cuban people that are the actual victims in this scene. And since now I'm speaking, I just want to say that one scene is the Cuban government and one scene is the Cuban people. The real victims right here are the Cuban people. The villain is the Cuban government. So if we can make that separation, I think that we'll come to somewhere in this meeting.
Thank you. We're not interested in a beach vacation because we can do that, in Florida or someplace else. We're interested in a learning experience.
All right.
So definitely you should go. and it's very difficult to explain. It's very, very, very complex, and it have many layers. So if you want the learning experience, just definitely should go. And I'm telling you, in the people, you're going to find amazing human beings, and you're going to find a very warm experience when it comes to terms of, you know, people and relationships and things like that. But it's gonna be like overwhelming as well.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Dagmar, and then Mel Foote, and then John Yearwood.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for asking the question how to help. And I think what Richard put together, just talking about this, is very important. And we are forgetting very often what's happening with South America. Here in the US media has its side on what's happening in Russia, in Ukraine, in Israel, in Gaza, and Taiwan. But normally the media here forgets to look a little bit closer in what's happening in Central America, Mexico, and South America. So talking about this is fundamental, and keeping this as an information. And when something happening to journalists in Latin America, please bring it up and speak up. And also, I think it's very important to make a supporting network for those journalists that are coming into the US, for journalists in exile. I know that the whole journalism sector is in crisis right now. We have a lot of jobs that have been erased. We have a lot of financial problems, but try to make a room for those journalists that are in exile and that are coming into the US, and make them welcome. So that's very important for me. And yes, advocating, I would say definitely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mel Foote, whose idea it was to have this session. Well, thank you, Mel.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm enjoying the conversation.
Oh yeah, let's tell people who you are first also.
Okay. My name is Mel Foote. I'm the president of the Constituency for Africa. I work on U.S. Africa policy. In fact, I just got back from Mali 2 weeks ago, and U.S. government told me don't go, security challenges, blah, blah, blah. Went and had a great visit. The only security challenge I saw was these motorbikes in the street, My point is I went to Cuba for the first time with Dwayne Wickham and several other Black journalists this summer. And I wanted to go to Cuba. I always wanted to go. So Dwayne called me up. I said, okay, I'm coming. And so I went really with my eyes open. What really shocked me, leaving Fort Lauderdale, flying to Cuba, as soon as you get above, up to cruising altitude, they give you a cup of water and say, okay, we're landing. And it's like flying from Washington to Baltimore, really. That's the first thing that hit me. I found the people extraordinarily warm. I didn't see any anti-Yankee go home or no evidence that, we were not welcome there at all. I saw, and I'm real sensitive to people conditions, and I saw the impact of the embargo, which is absolutely astounding. Now, I work on Africa. I know how the U.S. government do when they don't like you. They're mad at the Sahel countries right now because they had a series of coups that they needed to have, And so what did the U.S. do? We take out the sledgehammer and boom, do what we want you to do. Democracy, like we're the epitome of democracy, and we're not. And so, I'm looking at Cuba and I'm saying Guantanamo Bay. Is that not oppressive or what? So we are also, Cuba punches way above their weight on foreign policy. Cuba has done some wonderful things in terms of providing medical care and doctors for Ebola in Africa, the AIDS pandemic. Cuba has done punched way above their weight on foreign policy. Now, are they perfect? I'm sure they're not. But you got to also understand with the pressure of the U.S. government, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some, tendencies of the government to overreach. I would not be surprised whatsoever. I think some of the comments about press freedom are probably true. I don't doubt that. But I think it also has to be on balance here. I came back feeling like the U.S. government is still fighting Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro is long gone. We still, we got to do something about these Cubans. And I did appreciate the fact that I didn't see hunger in the streets. I didn't see people who couldn't go see a doctor. I think about the treatment of humanity. They're a hell of a lot better in Cuba than we are here, you know? And I'm not trying. So what I've done since coming back from Cuba, I organized a forum for African-American leaders at the Cuban embassy in September. And I had a range of key stakeholders and some of us who went on the trip just to have a conversation to learn more about Cuba. And so I think that it behooves us, one, the U.S. government should not be punishing any country in the Western Hemisphere like we punish in Cuba. We're trying to push Cuba to be like Haiti, a failed state, And is this what we should be doing? Clearly, the pressure from the South Cubans to try to punish Cuba continuously is part of the equation. So we as friends of, for me as an African-American, friends of Afro-Cubans and friends of, I want to get my government, the United States government, to behave better when it relates to people of color, Sure, if we should, and I will say finally, absolutely we should go to Cuba. We should start talking about the trip. I'm ready. February is a great time to go. Stay away from the hurricane season. But Richard, but take the lead. Richard, I'm with you on that. I'm ready to go back to Cuba because it's a fact finding. We do need to learn. I did do a lot of walking around while I was there just to try to get a feel of the place. And I came back feeling like we should have a different policy as it relates to Cuba. Thank you very much. I'm enjoying this very much, Richard. Thank you very much for organizing.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Since the embargo came up and the UN vote, we tried to get the State Department to have a representative come here, but we were unsuccessful. But during the UN vote on the embargo, the Associated Press reported the comments of the United States Deputy Ambassador. So I'll just read that here. U.S. Deputy Ambassador Paul Folmsby told the Assembly after the vote that the United States stands by its sanctions, which are, quote, one set of tools in our broader effort toward Cuba to advance democracy and promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. He said approximately 1,000 political prisoners remain behind bars in Cuba, more than at any point in its recent history. Nearly 700 were detained after historic protests on July 11th, 2021, when civil society representatives, including human rights defenders and minors, exercised their right to freedom of expression and to peaceful assembly. Quote, we share the Cuban people's dream of democracy in Cuba and join international partners in calling for the Cuban government to immediately release all those unjustly detained, Folmsby said. He urged Cuba to respond to requests from the UN Human Rights Council to send experts to the country to investigate its adherence to rights, including freedom of expression, religion, and peaceful assembly. There was sporadic booing in the assembly chamber when he concluded by saying the General Assembly should urge the Cuban government, quote, to adhere to its human rights obligations and listen to the Cuban people and their aspirations to determine their own future. And of course, Julio, in his statement to us yesterday, went into some detail about the human rights compact that Cuba had signed. All right, so we're going to move right on to, I think John Yearwood was next. John Yearwood.
Hello, Richard. Thanks for taking my question. I have a question for Rocio, but I guess first a little bio. I am right now at Politico as the editorial director for diversity and culture. Previous to that, I was the Politico's first global news editor. And previous to that, I spent 13 years as the Miami Herald's world editor, where I dispatched dozens of reporters to Cuba over various periods, and where I went to Cuba myself on several occasions. Given that, Rocio, I'm curious, when you mentioned that more people are speaking up in Cuba, I'm kind of curious about how that's happening and what are the consequences of that. I know certainly there were some differences, subtle differences between, as it relates particularly to press freedom, between Fidel and Raul. And now I'm curious between Raul and Diaz-Canel. Are we seeing any level being released, if you will, in terms of how the media is being treated under this new, this relatively new regime down there? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. The first thing I want to say is that Fidel Castro may be long gone, but his ideas are very much present in the Cuban government. That's the first thing I want to say. And Diaz-Canel regime is very different from Fidel. I think that no one can say that Fidel wasn't a very smart man. He was extraordinarily intelligent, and I think that he was the only person that knew what he was going to do with that country, because that country, sadly, because that's 11 million people's life, was his playground. So he's the only one that knew what was going to happen, the only one that knew how to balance that set of nuances that made Cuba a very unique country. So right now we have someone that has no idea what to do. He doesn't know how to cope with people just rising and saying, you're not doing a good job. He doesn't want to step out because he wants the power. He just doesn't know. And in my opinion, he's not smart enough, and he's not surrounded by the most smart people in the country right now, because every time he makes a decision, it's a disaster for the Cuban people. Every time. And he has a very bad luck because he had COVID. He had a tornado that that hadn't happened in Cuba in over 100 years. And as soon as he came to power, boom, a tornado in Havana. A plane fell. Things that never happened are happening right now. It's like the earth is rejecting the man because he has a very bad luck. And he doesn't know what to do. And his answer to everything is more repression. Just more repression. He's not willing to sit with anyone and listen to people's demands. So that's why his approach with Cuban journalists, that of course we have internet for all the population in Cuba since 2018. That's very recent. That's only 5 years. And people are starting to say, hey, you know what? Things are not going well. And the only answer that he has is more repression. And right now, with the new Cuban communication law, you can go to prison for sedition, for treason, but it's not well defined what qualifies as sedition or treason. So maybe if you're speaking bad of the government in your social media, you can go to prison. And no one knows for how many times. Right now, the professor Alina Barbara Hernandez, that has been a professor in Matanzas for more than 20 years, is facing a trial for disobedience just because she's speaking up against the government. She's just saying, hey, you know what? This new policy is not fair. This that you're doing is not okay, just for speaking. She's standing in a park by herself with a white sheet in her neck as a form of protest, and she's going to trial for that, for disobedience. She does that once a month. And she's an old lady. She's a woman that deserves respect. She's a very, very intelligent woman. So we should be listening to what she has to say. And maybe she can have, flaws. We all do. We are all humans. We don't have the right answer. We don't have the truth. But if we work together, we can do that. And I don't think that the Cuban government right now is willing to do that. They are only about money. And they have these, like I was saying, achievements, these things that they flash in front of the UN, and they say, hey, you know what? We are doing okay. We have health. Yeah, health in Cuba is free. But what is the point of going to the doctor and the doctor saying to you, hey, you know what? You have an infection. But we don't have antibiotics in the pharmacy. And since we are a monopoly country, we have no pharmacies and everything is controlled by the state. So you get an infection and yes, you were diagnosed for free, but you can get the medicine that you need. And then I really want to think about the concept of free in Cuba, because in socialism and communism, we are talking about plusvalía. I don't know how to translate that, but it's that any money that is excellent, any money that is, I mean, if your company is producing more, you are going to earn the same. If your company is producing less, you are going to earn the same. So all that more that is producing, the health sector that is like a business in Cuba, the tourist sector, the like Darcy was saying, Texas, that is the main recipient of money from the United States, all that money, all that extra money belongs to the Cuban people, because we are the ones that work for that money. We are the ones that produce that revenue. And that's our way of paying for our health, for our education. That's how it works. And we are not receiving quality education or quality health anymore. So what's the point of going to the doctor for free if then you can get treatment? There was a Cuban kid with a liver disease that died waiting for a transplant, but he didn't die because he didn't have the donor. He died because either the medical team wasn't complete, because medical people are fleeing the country like everybody else, or he died because there were no medical supplies for his operation, and he died, a kid, and he had the most difficult thing to get, that is the donor, a compatible one, and he died waiting. He waited for like 2 years. So that's the situation of the Cuban health system right now. That has been always the main thing that they had to flash.
Is there any, it's a part of interrupting, is there any way that the embargo can be cited as a reason for that kind of thing happening?
No, not anymore. Because that's what I was saying. If they are choosing to invest all the money that Cuba generates, that they generate money. And if they are investing that in building hotels, when all the hotels they have right now are empty, what are they doing? If they are not seeing that the people in the country need medicine, need food, and they are just thinking about building hotels, so what's that the embargo has to do with that? If I have to leave my country because I say that what the government is doing is wrong, what does the embargo has to do with that? Nothing. We cannot blame the embargo for everything. Actually, I would love the embargo to go away, just for people to really see what the problem is. And it's not the embargo. The embargo makes it a little bit more difficult, but they have ways of going around. They have been trading with Venezuela for oil since forever. Vladimir Putin is there by their side, giving their money, giving their support, condoning the debt. So what does the embargo has to do with any of those things?
Right. Well, you know, I spoke with, or I messaged Abraham Jimenez Inoa, who was in the video at the beginning. And I asked him about the embargo and whether that's to blame for a lot of what's going on. And he said, I'm against the embargo and I'm against dictatorships, and one has nothing to do with the other. Roger Witherspoon, please say who you are and then ask your questions.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. I've been a journalist for about 60 years and date back to a time when many of the country's newspapers had separate pay scales for Blacks and whites. And when I first started covering politics, it was not unusual for white reporters to walk up to me and say, your kind doesn't belong here.
Okay, your question, Roger, your question.
The question is, can you talk about the racial situation in Cuba? That was a factor in the original war, and it drove a lot of white Cubans to Miami, where they quickly embraced Jim Crow. What is the situation racially in Cuba now?
Well, I don't want to hover the conversation, so maybe if one of the other, I know.
Yes, Darcy, do you have an answer?
Yeah.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Yeah, please. I don't know if I understood the question.
He wants to know what is the racial situation in Cuba right now?
La
Si
situación
quiere saber cuál es la situación
racial.
racial en Cuba.
Oh, it's a really open question. La situación social en Cuba, bueno, para contextualizar con lo que han venido hablando.
Racial.
Racial. Oh,
Sí, ¿qué
wow.
sí.
Sí, bueno, mira, yo creo que también esto recurro de nuevo a la palabra narrativa porque es clave. Y la narrativa de la Revolución Cubana a lo largo de décadas ha sido que se abolió el racismo y que las personas negras empezamos a tener oportunidades a raíz del triunfo de la Revolución Cubana. Lo cierto es que pudimos ver el testimonio de un periodista como Abraham Jiménez Genoa. No importa tanto, o sea, en este sentido no se trata únicamente de discriminación racial porque la base es su ejercicio del periodismo y su posicionamiento político, pero más allá de eso también hay una discriminación fortísima hacia las personas negras en Cuba. Lo vemos también desde el punto de vista policial. Cuando ocurrió el asesinato aquí en Estados Unidos de George Floyd, todos nos sensibilizamos y las campañas fueron fuertes y con razón. Todos creíamos que había que denunciar muchísimo esto, pero también los cubanos vivimos episodios de este tipo en el país y hay un caso de un asesinato, una muerte extrajudicial de una persona negra. Estamos hablando de Hansel Hernández Galeano, si mal no recuerdo, y por esta persona también en Cuba se estuvo haciendo un poco de campaña desde los medios, exponiendo esta situación desde los medios independientes, nunca desde los estatales. Pero también en Cuba existe esta represión por motivo de la raza, del color de la piel, y eso es importante destacarlo. Ellos recurren a que contener una representación, digamos, de personas de la raza negra, de personas negras en determinados espacios de poder, con eso limpian su imagen y dicen que estamos representados, pero realmente no es así porque tener más o menos personas no determina que realmente las políticas hacia o contra el racismo en este caso sean efectivas. Y eso sí me gustaría.
Wait. Did our translators get all that?
That's enough.
Yes. Well, about the Black opportunities, there are many testimonies. One of them is Abraham's about not only the discrimination as a Black person, but also as a political and as a journalist. She believes that there's a lot of that when the whole situation about George Floyd got into the media, the Cuban people got really sensitive, and they decided that they wanted to do something, and they did do some protest about it. However, she believes that the government thinks that by having some representation in certain places of power, that can help demonstrate that they are having some areas. However, she believes that they are not being represented at all, that there's a lot of racism in the country against the Black people, the Black population. There's a lot of politics and a lot of situations that they have to face on a day-to-day life.
Okay, thank you.
Let me add to that, Richard?
Okay.
One of the things that Darcy was talking about has to do with the fact that using Black people's image as an improvement for Black people in Cuba has always been part of the government's narrative since the revolution, and that they have protested in Cuba against racism and George Floyd, for example, and they have had summary executions of Black people in Cuba, similar to the George Floyd situation. But that can't be used as the justification. I mean, basically, lack of racism in Cuba or better improvement of Black people's situation in Cuba can't be the main image that the government projects. It's a much more complex situation than that.
Okay. All right. Let me just also add that I ran across in researching all this some criticism of Nicole Hannah-Jones from some conservative outlets. One piece in the New Yorker says, in a 2019 interview with Vox founder Ezra Klein, Hannah-Jones said, if you want to see the most equal multiracial, it's not a democracy, but the most equal multiracial country in our hemisphere, it would be Cuba. Cuba has the least inequality between Black and white people of any place in the hemisphere. In places that are biracial countries, Cuba actually has the least inequality. And why is that? That's largely due to socialism, Hannah-Jones claimed. Okay, moving right along. Andy Richards had a question or comment.
Hi, allow me a little bit of time to set it up. So Andy Richards, NJ Advanced Media. My great-grandmother had a partner in Jamaica and had a set of kids, and then had another partner in Cuba and had another set of kids. And my relatives in Cuba have emigrated to the United States. One of them was a doctor, which you said many doctors leave the country. So this is all fitting into the narrative. But my cousins that are my age are staunchly Republican, and they look like me. They're you know, they moved to Florida. Florida's the best state in the United States, and you know, they're all into DeSantis and Trump. What is it about that's happening in Cuba that would make Black people think that DeSantis and Trump are the way to go?
Pain is the answer you're looking for. Yeah, pain. When you have to leave your country and for never going back, when you feel forced to leave your house, if you ask any Cuban that is not living in Cuba right now, did you leave by choice? They're going to say no. If my country was a functional country, if we had opportunities, if we had the ability of grow as person, as people in Cuba, we will stay. We all want to go back. That's why Versailles is always full in Florida. That's why La Carreta, that's why everybody in Miami is just emulating their life in Cuba, because it was not a choice. It was a life and death situation. It was chosen to leave, even if you won't fix again anymore, even if what you remember doesn't exist anymore. And what most of people in Miami want is the Cuban government to be gone. And sometimes they may feel like the Democrats are like, you know, dancing a more romantic dance with that Cuban government. And then you have people like Trump that is kind of is trying to leave no options for that government. That's why, and maybe I don't think if I said this before, the situation in Cuba after 2020 is very different of anything that any of you that have gone to Cuba had experienced before. If you went to Cuba in 2019, then you don't know the Cuba that is, you know, that exists today. The Cuba that you visit in 2019 doesn't exist anymore. The Cuba that you visit in 1999 is long gone. 2011 as well. 2016 with Obama, oh my God, that was the dream. That doesn't exist anymore. And people are only projecting their pain into politics. because someone is speaking what they want to hear. That is, we don't want more communism in Cuba. We want Castro ideas to be gone, to be finished. We want the Cuban people to be free, and we are going to do something about it. But what I think that is happening with the embargo, I disagree with the embargo. But I agree with the if you want the embargo to be gone, then Cuba needs to be democratic. I mean, I disagree completely with the idea of forcing a country to go how you want the country to go. But I do agree with the fact that Cuba needs to be an open democracy.
May I just add on to that, though, Rocio, because DeSantis and Trump are decidedly anti-Black, and my relatives are Black. So I understand the pain of having to leave your country and wanting democracy, but to pour yourself into siding with these decidedly anti-democratic people seems really strange to me.
The thing is, in Cuba, we have racism, we have systemic racism, because if you go to the poor neighborhoods, you will find more Black people than white people. But the thing is that what is constant for all Cubans is that we are trying to survive, because our situation is bad, is very bad. So people are not thinking about the color of their skin when they are making that decision. It's very different, the racism in Cuba, than the one that you experience in the United States. It's very, very different, because yes, we do have a lot of opportunities. Yes, no one is saying to us in a bus, you know, you don't belong here. No one is saying to us in the university, hey, you don't belong here. Maybe someone will make fun of my hair, but then I will make fun of, I don't know, their nose, because that's how we are in Cuba. We are a little bit more resilient in that. And we do have racism, but let's call it, and I don't like saying this, but let's call it kind of mild, you know? You don't suffer that much. You only know that you do have a lot of opportunities as a Cuban citizen, but then you have a lot of challenge as a Cuban citizen. And we all share that. We share the challenges and we share the opportunities. So that's why when Cuban voters are making a decision, they are not thinking about the color of their skin. They are thinking about the thing that pains them. When you as a Black American woman are making a decision, you are talking about your pain. And your pain as an American woman is different as my pain of an American Cuban. You know, my pain is I have no freedom, but that doesn't apply to my skin color. It doesn't care if I am white, if I am Black, if I am mixed. I have no freedom anyway. So when people are making a decision, they are thinking about that pain, and that's the root. And the root is we have no freedom. And as long as the Cuban government is in Cuba, I can never go back to my country. I cannot go back home. And all I want is to go back home. So what's going to take me there? Trump? Let's vote for Trump, because that is my pain. My pain is I want to go back home. Your pain as a Black American woman is that you don't want to speak in that kind of races anymore. You want to feel like you belong. You want race to stop being an issue. That's your pain. And maybe when you are living in the United States for 20 years, that pain becomes also your pain. You know, like trying to fit again. But it's just what pain speaks louder.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Julie about that. What percentage of the Cuban population is Black? So I'll let somebody respond in the chat. Okay. Now, McNelly Torres has her hand up, and I was going to call on McNelly anyway.
Why?
One of her roles is as a vice president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. And I wonder if you could just mention anything that NAHJ might have to do with this subject, particularly, as I mentioned, the plight of these independent Cuban journalists who are looking for work. I wonder, and I mentioned Palabra, I wonder if there's anything else we can mention in terms of NAHJ and these Cuban journalists. And then, of course, you had a question, so take it away.
So I unfortunately, I am not here in any capacity. I representing NAHJ. I don't work with Palabra. That's a separate entity from the board. And you know, I live in Miami. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's so great to see all these beautiful faces. Some of you I know. I've been in Miami for 17 years now. I work here in the newspaper for many years. And even though I'm an editor at the Center for Public Integrity, but I'm based here in Miami. I've covered a lot of things over the years. And you know, I am very conflicted about a lot of things. One of the things that I will never get used to from living in Miami is the fact that the discrimination, racism, you know, Black people here, including Black Cubans, is just very, and Haitians. Let's just not forget Haitian. We have a vibrant Haitian community here in South Florida. And I always seen the whole migration thing as, you know, very discriminatory in the United States, how some people are allowed to come in and others not. Colorism is a real thing. It exists. And it's something that I see as a Puerto Rican and I'm an American. What I have seen over the years from all these communities here in South Florida is that people come here from their countries with their emotional, political, oppressive baggage that they endure in their countries. And they come here and they don't learn our history. So, you know, I heard Dagmar saying about, you know, the right and the left. I don't like to look at this as ideology, because it doesn't matter if a country is oppressive and it's a dictatorship. I don't care the ideology. It is the same thing, right? It's oppressive. There's no democracy. So they come here looking for a better life. And somehow there's a disconnect there, which I encounter a lot, is that they don't know our history. They don't know our history. And that's why they fall into this political rhetoric from Trump, from DeSantis. Trust me, Trump can be president again. He's not going to do anything for Cuba. He doesn't care about Cuba. That is the reality and the fact. You know, the same things with DeSantis. So, and I think that us as journalists, we have a responsibility and a role to educate people, and we are sort of kind of failing on that. We have been failing on it because I keep hearing so much garbage. And let me tell you something. Last year, I was in DC. I was traveling around, and Rebecca just left. I just went to her dinner as a president of SPJ, her farewell dinner, and my Uber driver was from Cuba. And he's just been here for 5 years. 5 years. You would not believe the stuff that came out of that mouth of that man, talking about the Black Americans communities, that I have to stop in and say, hey, have you read any history about America? So I gave him a couple of titles. I gave him like an assignment. You need to read all this book and educate yourself, because you are repeating the Fox News lies about communities. So you know, that's what I wanted to say. I've been here for a long time. You know, I was a military wife. And yes, I welcome NSJ to create programs, especially on training. I have trained journalists from here who are in Cuba with FIU, Florida International University. And those poses a lot of challenges, especially trying to connect with the island and looking for those back channels to be able to train journalists over there. And that's all I wanted to share. We need to do a better job educating people. Seriously,
Okay.
folks.
Thank you very much. Now, go ahead, Zita, yes. You have to unmute.
Sorry, followed the conversation, fascinating. I'm not an apologist for Cuba or the Cuban government. And in fact, when I was a reporter in Miami back in the 70s during Mariel Boatlift and all that, when the flights to Cuba resumed for exiles, and finally after 20 years, I was born in Cuba, we were allowed to return to see our family members there. So I'm not an apologist for Cuba at all, but we do have to keep in mind the incredible history of US, what's the word I want to use here? of U.S. domination of Cuba going back in history to the time before, the Spanish-American War. And at certain points in time in history, the U.S. actually owned Cuba. We all know about the Platt Amendment, right? Which was in existence for a number of years.
I don't know about the Platt Amendment.
Yeah, the Platt Amendment was adopted right after the Maine and the Spanish were kicked out of Cuba, and the Americans said they won the war, except that the Cubans the Mambisas had already won the war. And by the way, the Revolution Army back then was one of the generals was a Black general, Antonio Maceo, and so the Blacks in Cuba helped win that war, even though they never really got the recognition that they deserved. But anyway, that's beside the point. My point is that I've taken two groups of students, university students from the border to Cuba. First trip was in 2017. The second one was in 2019. And the Cuban government and the people in the assembly, in the Cuban assembly, if you ask them about their system, they say that they don't even refer to Marxist-Leninism anymore, really. They say that they're moving towards a social democracy. And if you look at the Constitution, that was revised and adopted in 2019. There are term limits now for the president. There's still there isn't more than one party. That is very true. But they say that they're perfecting the revolution. And no, they do not want American-style capitalism at all. And so, again, not taking away the fact that it is a very repressive regime, that people are controlled at the community level by the Comités por la Defensa de la Revolución. And so there is tremendous repression there. There's no doubt about it. But again, a lot of how Cuba has acted and responded to the U.S. is because they have been under constant aggression. The embargo is just one example. Do you all remember the assassination attempts, how many there were against Fidel? Do you remember Bay of Pigs, right? Do you remember all that stuff? Okay, so a lot of the way in which the government has responded, never mind Fidel's ideas, but it has been in reaction to aggressions by the United States. So I think we have to put all this in context. As far as where they're going, I have no idea. I don't think that system can be sustained the way that it is. They have all kinds of tricks to get around the embargo, like Rocio was saying. But, Lord knows. And so we have to keep the story in context. There's a wonderful book that won a Pulitzer Prize by Ada Ferrer. I put it in the chat. And basically, she takes us all the way back. It's a fantastic read to the Revolutionary War, prior to the Revolutionary War against Spain. And again, U.S. intervention over and over and over again into the politics of Cuba. And at one point, there were even a lot of people who wanted Cuba to be annexed, to become a part of the United States, right? So I guess my bottom line is, let's remember the complexity of this situation. Let's remember how the U.S. has, in many cases, created the background for some of the responses that Cuba has taken, and they feel that they are a country under attack for good reason. So that's my take. I was born in Cuba. My family left Cuba in 1957, 2 years before the revolution, because of poverty, not politics. My family is from a small rural community. I have seen their pain. We send money to them to help them buy rice and beans and medicine and Advil, whatever they need. But but again, and this was said before today, those of you who want to go to Cuba, it's an amazing country. It's a beautiful country. The people are beautiful. Remember that there are ways to go in which you can help individuals and not the government, to the extent that we can not support that repressive government, but that we can help the Cuban people, like staying in Airbnbs, and like, meeting just people on the street. And so I would never say to anyone, don't go to Cuba. I say, go to Cuba, support the people. And that's what Obama was trying to do. Unfortunately, then we had someone who backtracked on everything that Obama was trying to do in the relationship between the two countries. So it's a sad situation, it's a conflicted situation, and it is a very complex situation. So I just wanted to share that with you all. I love my country, I love my people, and I will go as much as I can back to Cuba to help the people I came from. So anyway, thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Zita, for that. Okay, our last two questions will be, E.R. Ship, did you still want to say something? Your hand had been up.
I was going to point out that Mr. Contreras was trying to get in, so.
All right, well, that was, he will have the last question. Felix, welcome.
Thanks, man. Thanks, everybody. It's really nice to see a lot of friendly faces and meet all these other folks.
Oh, you have to tell people who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Felix Contreras. I am co-host and creator of the Alt Latino podcast for NPR. Been doing that for 13 years. Been at NPR for 21 years now. Snuck up on me. Very quickly, as I stated, my expertise is in music, and I've been a student of Cuban music and history for a very, very long time. And then I just want to re-emphasize, and I'm glad everyone's saying that it's a complex situation. And I wanted to make a comment about the racial situation in Cuba. One of the things that stands out to me is that Cuba has always led the world, or at least led Latin America, in their embrace of the Afro-Cuban or their African heritage in their music and in their culture. Second, Brazil's probably second, but Cuba's been the most forward-looking, and Puerto Rico as well, McNally, just putting it out there. But one of the things that happens is, one of the things I notice is that, the society, while there may be all of these complex relationships and situations in society, you're not going to find anyone in Cuba who doesn't recognize Africa as a source of their rich musical heritage, which doesn't happen here in the United States, man, because nobody knows about Sister Rosetta Tharpe, right? As one of the originators of rock and roll sound. You will never hear that kind of conversation here in the United States about the originators of rock and roll like they do in Cuba. So I just want to point that out, that the differences there and the embracing of that culture. And it's in everything that I see and hear. Even as recently as last night when we were at the Kennedy Center, we presented 3 pianists for Jazz Piano Christmas. They each had different takes. They're all, they're no longer on the island. They're all living in different places in the United States and in Canada. But it's still that connection to Africa is so deep and ingrained in everything that they do. So that it's while dealing with the racism in the country, or the colorism, that's still a foundation, and you can't get around it. I mean, that's the only point I wanted to make, is that the difference of what you see in Cuba versus what we experience here in the United States when we're dealing with popular music.
Thank you, Felix. And I think I put in the roundtable version of that statement yesterday a link to I can't remember the name of how to pronounce it, but it's about the Afro-Cuban music. The documentary was made for PBS, and it was fabulous, and it pointed out the connection between the diaspora, the African diaspora all around the world, and how it's manifested in Cuba. So I recommend that to folks as well. Maria Rana has responded also to the question about how many Black people are there in Cuba. She says the U.S. State Department estimates that the Black mixed population is at least 66%. The Cuban government promotes a much lower number. And then there's some follow-ups to that conversation. So just look in the chat for that. And I will say that the people on this call will all receive printouts of the chat box, so that they can, people have put links in there and other reference material. And anybody who's watching on Facebook or YouTube can just contact me and in the messages, and I can add them to the list of people who are getting that. So before I wanted to, we have to have our introductions. We're running over because we had a late start, and get to the people who haven't said anything. But I also wanted to make a shout out and thank so much Zita Arocha and Yvonne Roman, who were co-organizers of this roundtable, and Miriam Cruz, who's our translator. So Miriam, tell us who you are, and then we'll go and get other folks too. How did you end up in this situation?
I am by heart a meeting planner. I happened to, but I had been in the border. I am a fronteriza. I've been, I was born in Mexico and then moved to the United States in 2000s, in the early 2000s. Being in the border, it's always an easy thing to learn both languages. You grow up listening to both. The reason that I became a translator was because working on an international organization, I fell in love with this technical way of living, and I started learning and taking classes, and that's how I became an interpreter.
All right. And there was a connection with NAHJ, wasn't there, in their convention?
Yes, there's a convention, but that's what has made me close to journalism.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you very much. John Watson.
Hi, I'm a journalism professor at American University, 21 years as a journalist covering North Jersey, and my research focus is communication law and journalism ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we heard from Roger, we heard from Milton. Andy, I don't think we heard from you this time.
My name's Andy Richards, and I'm a managing producer, Diversity of Voices. That's my title. And I report mainly on social justice issues, and I try and infuse any kind of knowledge about African-American history into my stories. It could be the most benign story, and I try and slip something in because, like people were saying, we need to educate people about, I guess, about Blackness in America and our contributions and the scope of our influence, and also some of the things that we suffer with because we are Black. I just want to thank Richard for letting me in the group. I am relatively new to journalism, even though I'm not so young, but I'm new to the profession, and so it's all very exciting to me. And I hope to continue and grow for as long as I can.
All right, thank you very much for being with us. Elliot Francis.
Yes, Richard, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Elliot Francis, former broadcast news anchor and reporter, currently host producer of Now with Elliot Francis, streaming live over Facebook weekly and YouTube.
All right, very good. Maureen Bunyan. All right, we see a blank screen there. You must be away from the computer for a minute. All right, E.R. Ship.
Hi, everybody. I am an old person. I've been in journalism for a long time, but I'm currently a professor of journalism at Morgan State University, and I also teach media law and ethics, among other things, there. And I write a column on occasion for the Baltimore Banner here in Baltimore.
Okay, Diana Fuentes.
Let's see. Diana Fuentes. Yes, I'm Executive Director of Investigative Reporters and Editors, and another wonderful conversation. And like Miriam, I grew up on the media. I grew up on the border, on the Texas-Mexico border, and I'm also a bilingual, bicultural person, and journalist for more than 35 years, that I'll admit to anyway. So it was a wonderful conversation, and I welcome all of our Cuban colleagues, and hope to continue this kind of thing. And like we said, we really just need to get the word out about what's going on over there. I think that's the biggest thing that we can do as journalists, right? Like Sita said, we just need to tell people what's going on. That's what we can do. That's how we help each other. Get the word out. The darkness, right? The darkness is where democracy dies. So we need to shine the light.
All right. Moran
Richard,
Banyan.
Richard, okay, gotcha. Richard, I sent you a note just now.
Oh.
I have said breaking news.
What's that?
Richard Prince organizes journalism's first trip to Cuba. So that's your next.
That would be cool. I would love to.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Got to get on the ground.
Ooh, a
As long as we can have a
roundtable.
translator with us.
A lot of us would help you. There's a lot of us here that do that. We'd be happy to do that.
I'm so glad you've done this gathering, Richard. My background is I am a longtime broadcast journalist, now retired. Started in 1970 in New York and spent also 43 years on the air here in Washington. During those years, I made several trips to Cuba, starting in 1976 to cover. In 76, I covered the bombing of the Air Cubana airline over Barbados. And the bombing was apparently done by Cuban exiles in Miami with the help of the CIA. And the bombing caused the deaths of 77 people on the airline, including the entire Cuban fencing team. It also, I was there, and at that moment, it was fascinating to be there because I got to see the solidarity of the Cuban people and how much they loved their sports figures. But also, that was the time when Castro abrogated the U.S.-Cuban anti-hijacking agreement. You may remember back in the 60s and early 70s, Americans were hijacking airplanes and taking them to Cuba, forcing them to go to Cuba. The Cubans were accepting the airlines and the planes, and it got so bad that the U.S. Approached Castro about this anti-hijacking agreement. And after the anti-hijacking agreement was passed or was agreed upon, Castro then decided not to allow the American hijackings to continue. And so they stopped. But I feel very close to Cuba because I've managed to go to Cuba almost, at least every 2 or 3 times every decade since the 70s. So I've made a lot of friends there. Some of them have passed on, but I've made friends with the artistic community, including filmmakers, as well as people in the medical communities, etc. And some of the stories I covered the first medical exposition ever held in Havana. It was arranged by an American company in New York. And in reference to some of the things that our Cuban colleagues were saying, this was in the late 80s, early 90s. And through the US State Department and the Cubans, it allowed American medical supply companies to come to Cuba to share the latest technology, et cetera, with the Cuban medical community. In exchange, the medical communities left all of their equipment in Havana. So I recall that things from as varied as mammogram machines and x-ray machines were brought to Havana, left in Havana, and that was a way in which to help enhance the medical services to the Cuban community. I met Che Guevara's daughter, who was, and I believe she still is, a pediatrician. I met several of the wonderful musicians who played in Cuba. I feel very fortunate to have met so many people. I also interviewed the I think he's gone now, the architect of Old Havana, and did a story on the renovation of Old Havana. So I feel I've seen a lot of what's gone on in Cuba. One of the things that I do want to point out is I have seen in these 3 generations, and I don't know, I'm looking at what I saw in Havana about 10 years ago. I saw the improvement in health, the health of Cubans. When I was there in the 70s, the people who were my age, 20s, 30s, looked terrible. There was huge, huge food shortages, terrible, if any, major health care. The next generation of Cubans were better looking, obviously had better nutrition. The 3rd generation that I saw, which was about 10 years ago, and these were the grandchildren of the people I saw in the 70s, they looked like movie stars. They were gorgeous, beautiful young people, and very, very aware of what the problems were in the country. And they were extremely, to me anyway, I thought extremely sensitive and concerned about their image in the US, and, you know, that they weren't all smoking cigars and, you know, the old Cuban cliches. So that's why, Richard, I think, and I hope that it would be possible for you and certainly other journalists to make a trip today, because as our journalism colleagues have said, things have changed in the last 5-10 years. And the journalists in exile today are a different generation than the ones that were in exile when I first started going to Cuba. So I would be so interested in seeing what they have seen in their country. I certainly think that we, as journalists of color in the United States, could learn tremendous stories, tremendous information about American colonialism, the history of our country in the Caribbean, the control that the U.S. has had over all of the Caribbean, to say nothing of the Americas in general, but especially of the Caribbean, because you must remember that the Caribbean basin was always treated by the United States as part of this country. Maybe not technically, but our islands were always treated as belonging to us, belonging to American industry, belonging to American tourists, dependent on the big guy in the north. And I think sometimes we don't get that understanding when we are spending all our time in the US. So that's it. By the way, my family's from Guyana, and I was born in Aruba, and I've been all over the Caribbean, obviously including Cuba. So I have a sensitivity about these subjects.
Yeah, in fact, Tojo Namdi was with us also for a few minutes on this call. Who's also talking about Guyana. Yeah. Now we have a surprise here. I see Serafin is here.
I did. Hello.
Your name has come up so many times in this conversation.
Oh, I know. I can see it about that.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Pick it up.
Well, we have our translator ready if you prefer to talk in Spanish. But briefly, if you could just tell us 2 things that I wanted to ask you about. Of course, the main question of victim, villain, or both, but also about the plight of independent journalists in Cuba that we talked about, and what the United States, the journalists in the United States can help with that, how they can help with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to speak Spanish, but I don't know if I can to explain very good about the thing about the heart, about the inside person for about the Cuban in English. So is you having in this medium, you have a interpret It's
Yes,
good
we have
for
the
me.
interpreter. Miriam is here.
All right, in Spanish.
Adelante, Serafín.
Sí, ante todo agradezco en esta pequeña comunidad que hoy nos estamos reuniendo aquí, saber un poco más acerca de la verdadera y realidad de Cuba.
Thank you, everybody, for the invitation to this small community that is interested in knowing more about the truth and the reality of Cuba.
So, la problemática de la libertad de expresión en Cuba antes del 59 era bastante dinámica y bastante fuerte. O sea, cuando habían algunos presidentes como Estrada Palma, Batista, estos presidentes que dependían de algunos términos en ocasiones de los Estados Unidos.
The problem, the way the thing, the dynamics of the freedom of expression in Cuba before 59 was a different dynamic with the president Batista because he was very dependent on the U.S.
So, now, después del 59, hubo mucho control sobre la sociedad, mayormente sobre la sociedad de color, que fue muy maltratada y muy llevada a fondo, y más que aquellos no podían tener un seguidor no aceptaban tener un seguidor como Castro, que traicionaba constantemente hasta sus mismos oficiales por tal de mantenerse en el poder.
After 59, it was a centralization about the freedom of expression in the society in general, more to the people of color that were very, very mistreated, and they were left to, because they were left aside because also these people could not accept Castro because he saw him as somebody that they could not trust, because they saw that Castro would even he would even treason he would be even mistreated or fail his own officers.
Ser un negro en Cuba resultó mucha problemática, y aun cuando aumentó la inmigración haitiana hacia la parte oriental en aquellos tiempos. ¿Por qué? Porque traían sus culturas y no eran dignos de la continuidad de las culturas del comunismo. Estudiar en Cuba resultó una barrera para nosotros los negros, y más llegar a conocer lo que es el mundo del periodismo en el cual hoy me encuentro.
To be a Black person in Cuba is very problematic because, and even also to include, that includes the people from Haiti that started to migrate into the east side of the country because they were not considered that they would be good for the communism, and even to study to be somebody in Cuba, to be Black was a big roadblock for them, and of course more even for journalism.
El negro en Cuba era nada más que como un medio de atracción al turista, o sea, ya sea por censo controlado por el régimen comunista, ya sea como guiador de, por ser un negro, ya sabemos lo que implica.
No te escuchamos, Serafín.
¿Me escuchan?
Ajá. Te perdimos hasta donde era de ser negro lo que implica.
Sí, ser negro lo que implicaba en Cuba en aquellos momentos es una atracción turística de personas, ya sea de Inglaterra, del propio aquí de los Estados Unidos, de otros países donde no existiera el negro como tal. Pero era negativo tener comunicaciones con turistas. Ser un guía turista en Cuba de color negro y no eres controlado por el régimen, podía llevar a cabo hasta 5 años de prisión por proselitismo. O sea, tenía que ser...
Okay. To be black in Cuba was more of an attraction to the tourism, especially for those countries where there were not a lot of black people, and also for obviously for England and the USA. That implies that even if you were a tourist guide, and if you were not controlled by the government, you were exposing yourself to 5 years of prison with accused of proselytism.
Podías estudiar economía, podías estudiar ingeniería, podías estudiar licenciatura, como me tocó a mí, estudiar licenciatura en mecánica, electrónica y comunicación, y podías hacer un verdadero oficial de las Fuerzas Armadas, que al final, si no te dejas controlar por el régimen cubano, ibas a prisión de cualquier forma, como me ha tocado a mí, pasar días, tiempos y años en prisión por tan solamente defender los derechos de la sociedad cubana, los derechos humanos.
You were able to, or allowed to, study economics, engineering, or like me, a bachelor's degree in electronic communication, even the armed forces as well, but you could not be not controlled by the government, like me, that if you would not be controlled, then you would be spending years and days in prison because you were defending human rights.
No solamente estudiar comunicación en Praga, me tocó a mí licenciatura en comunicación y periodismo en Praga, sino a través de la embajada americana, y al ver el régimen castrista de que mi nivel cultural aumentaba, mis estudios aumentaban, estudié mecánica, ingeniería en electricidad y electrónica. Era un problema porque saber la realidad de Cuba y visitar muy adentro los problemáticos de Cuba, no solamente de La Habana, sino de Matanzas, Santiago de Cuba, Guantánamo, me llevó a la verdadera historia de guiarme por lo que es la prensa y así hablar, comunicar al mundo entero la realidad del pueblo cubano, por lo que verdaderamente está pasando el pueblo cubano y no la falsa imagen que el régimen está emitiendo para poder atraer personas y presidentes de otros países para implicarlos en deuda.
So when I went to study communications in Praga, and I learned through the U.S. Embassy about everything, and I saw that my cultural level was growing. Then I also studied mechanics, electricity, and mechatronics. And I also started visiting way beyond the Havana. I went to Santiago, Matanzas, Guantánamo, and that's when I started to have the need to talk to the press and to have more guided communication about what is really happening in Cuba, and not what is really the government wants to put outside in order to attract other governments to put money into their projects.
Yeah. Debido a esta situación, el régimen ha prohibido a todos los periodistas, si no están controlados por el mismo régimen, les ha prohibido trabajar haciendo la manera de que se vean libremente, y de esta manera los periodistas independientes o graduados que no trabajan para el régimen se ven obligados a salir a las calles, tratar la manera de usar un medio de prensa exterior que los puedan ayudar económicamente a través de estas noticias que sean primicias, y de esta manera cada periodista puede ganarse aunque sea 10, 15, quizás $20 por mes para poder alimentarse y pagar el alto costo de la internet para poder enviar estas noticias.
The situation with the regime that we have right now, that if you are a journalist and you don't want to be controlled by the government, you are not allowed to work freely. If you are a journalist that is not working for the government, you need to go to they go to the streets and try to use a different way of a different media, and trying to get a foreign government or a foreign resource to pay for them, so they can give them their news, and that way they can earn 10, 15 or $20 a month that they will use to pay for the internet service and feed themselves.
Si no trabajas para el régimen cubano, eres enemigo de la dictadura, como me ha pasado a mí, que sufrí la deportación y la separación de mis 2 hijas menores y mi familia, una separación desvinculada con amenaza de volver a prisión si regreso a la calle con más de 30 años. También conozco otros periodistas, he sufrido persecución, he sufrido encarcelamiento, disparo de arma de fuego, he sufrido grandes torturas y golpizas por la forma de expresarme y decir la verdad con relación a lo que sucede al régimen cubano. Ahora, no solamente yo, sino también conozco muchos periodistas que han tenido esta situación y han pasado tiempo en prisión, como Portar Contreras, Julio, también periodista cubano de color, raza negra, otros periodistas en Oriente que solamente para poder alimentarse tienen que ver cómo encuentran las noticias a escondidas en las calles para poder entregárselas a unos medios de prensa y así poder obtener algo de estímulo, o sea, un pago por este trabajo y así poder vivir, porque el régimen no te da empleo, no te da un salario, no te ayuda en nada y lo que te lleva una vez más a prisión junto con delincuentes para que puedan acabar con tu vida pagados por ellos mismos.
To work in Cuba without being part of the government turns you into an enemy. That's why I have been deported and separated from my 2 daughters and also from the rest of my family. I have received threats, persecution. I have been shot at with weapons. I have received beatings, and I am because I talked about the Cuban regime. I know others that also have gone through the same situation. Julio and others that are on the east side of the island, that to feed themselves, they have to go into to hide and see how they can go and find those news, those things that nobody knows about, and then they give it to the media and get some money to leave. Because if you are not with the government, you receive no salary and you only receive a threat to be imprisoned.
Decir la verdad, en Cuba ha costado hasta muerte de muchas personas. Yo he sido envenenado, he sido puesto en cautiverio a punto ya de perder la vida. Gracias a Guyana, quien me recogió a través de las Naciones Unidas, el país de Guyana, Guyana inglesa, quien me recogió cuando fui deportado de Cuba, porque de mi propio país me expulsaron, solamente por ser defensor de los derechos humanos y ser prensa, no ser violento, no ser un delincuente, solamente por expresar la verdad. Y como yo, muchos que trabajan la prensa y que hoy quisiera y aprovecho este momento, que a ver alguna, no las Naciones Unidas, no Reporteros Sin Fronteras, no otros medios de prensa, sino que existiera alguna forma de cómo poder unir en una sola verdad lo que pasa con los periodistas cubanos de color, que muchas veces, hasta en otros países también, por ser de color, no nos dan el lugar que realmente necesitamos.
Me permite un momento. He also mentioned before that when you are sent to prison, they put you together with criminals that will get your life as part of the government plot. To say the truth in Cuba, it will drive you to be dead. I have been poisoned. I have been receiving many threats, and if not for English Guyana, British Guyana through the UN that took me in when I got deported from Cuba only because I was defending the truth and the human rights. Many other friends and journalists, colleagues have gone through the same situation. And I also want to mention not about the Reporters Without Borders or the UN journalist group. We have to find a way, and I want to take this opportunity to find the truth, a way of with people of color can get in, because we don't get a chance to do so even in other countries.
Okay, we got to stop it there because we're really out of time. I also just heard from Julio Antonio Rojas Portal, who says, I tried by all means to communicate with you over the internet from my home, and it was impossible. You don't know how much I regret it. So now we have to wrap this up, but I did want to ask Serafin if people wanted to communicate with him, how could they do that? I wanted to translate that, Miriam, for him. How can they? Yeah.
I cannot hear you well. Jorge, quiero decirte que te agradezco mucho que hayas participado. Can you repeat, Richard, because I could not hear you. You were choppy. You were cutting off.
Miriam, you're breaking up.
Yeah.
Is he still there? Sí. Queremos saber que si algunos de los periodistas quieren conectarse contigo, que cómo lo podemos hacer.
De periodistas que quieran conectarse conmigo directamente, lo pueden hacer a través de mi WhatsApp, de mi teléfono, de mi medio que uso como nombre Cuba Reporta TV, mi canal de YouTube, pero si directamente la comunicación es conmigo, pueden usar mi número de teléfono, que es 786-682-5587. Repito.
Okay. Sí.
786. You get it?
Miriam, I'm going to put it in the chat for everyone. He says that the best way would be, he does have a YouTube channel. He's got a WhatsApp channel, but if you need to contact him, he's shared his phone number, which is 786-682.
Oh, there it is on the chat.
5587.
Okay, thank you very much.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we're going to wrap up our introductions. We haven't heard from Dr. Kendrick. Please tell us.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My apologies for the tardiness. I had the other Zoom link and I just saw the update. I'm Dr. Frederick Kendrick. I saw one of my former colleagues, E.R. Shipp, was in here earlier.
Yes.
I have numerous years teaching. I've been teaching for 18 years now, 10 years at Howard, 3 at Morgan State. I'm currently at Tuskegee. I'm a professor of communications. I've been to Cuba more times than you can imagine. was most recently there about 3 years ago, and it's only been that amount of time because I was overseas the last 3 years in the Middle East. But I'm a professor of communications. The speaker who was talking to us, I do not know personally, but my best friend apparently is a best friend of his, Max Barbosa Miranda, is also a journalist in Cuba, and just texted me and said that Rocio Baro is one of his best friends, and he has a similar experience. And my friend Max Miranda Barbosa is now in Miami and suffered some of the same atrocities and experiences. But I've been all over Havana, all over Cuba, beautiful place. And I heard Maureen Bunyan talking earlier. A lot of the things she said, I've witnessed as well about the healthcare, just a lot of that stuff. And sorry for being late, and thank you for having me.
That's okay. Since this is recorded, you can look at the recording and catch up to what was said before you got in there. So that's good. Now, Jackie Green, I have to give a special shout out to, is our producer for the broadcast. Thank you, Jackie. Please introduce yourself too.
Hi, as Richard said, I am now co-producer of the broadcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And we really apologize for the tardiness here, but as you know, technology can be a challenge. And this time we tried something new to be able to do this live and translate both orally and written form. As we grow, we hope that you will continue to follow and to support. I am a retired journalist from USA Today, one of the founding members of the newspaper. After 30 years, now I'm a consultant doing work in Africa and in the US. And on joining me is my life partner and wife, Cynthia Robbins.
Cynthia, why don't you step in now then?
Greetings, everyone. Hola a toda la gente que habla en español. I'm Jackie's wife, and I am a lawyer by training. I've done civil rights litigation and criminal defense, and I have done a lot of international work, and so I'm very excited. Richard, once again, you have brought a complex topic to the fore, and I think there was a very wonderful, nuanced discussion. And I thank all of those who provided such incredible background information, particularly about the more recent changes and the idea that Cuba before 2019 is different than Cuba now. That was really an insight to me out of this conversation. And I loved Maureen Bunyan's breaking news, so I hope that it comes to pass and that Journal-isms will organize a trip and with wonderful folks who can really help to elucidate the nuances. I think we learn much more by going and seeing for ourselves. And the most important thing, especially in this season of Advent, is to bring the truth to light.
Hear, hear.
So thank you.
Yeah, hear, hear. I will also point out, though, what Julio said in his note, and that is, don't just go to the places that the authorities want you to see. Go visit the families of the people in jail and that kind of thing. See the whole country, the real country. Now, we have a guest photographer with us, Janine Cummins. Janine, would you introduce yourself? If you can hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you. Hold on.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Janine Cummins. I'm a member of the Exposure Group, African American Photographer Society of Washington, D.C. And I've been to Cuba before. I was only there quickly for like 2 days, and I was the only photographer in the group. It was some friends, and it was really, I just was shooting from the hip. I was shooting out car windows, but I'm also in charge of a camera club in Maryland that a lot of people going to Cuba, but all they managed to photograph are the cars. And it was, it just wasn't, and they go there all the time, and that's the first thing they want to photograph are the cars. And I too got pictures of cars, but I was trying to go other places. I wanted to go to the Malecón because I saw a really nice documentary about Cuba on PBS one time, and I just wanted to go out, but I couldn't get anybody to go with me, but I do want to go back. None of my friends wanted to go back. They said they experienced it. It was nice. Okay. But I was looking at it under a different eye. And some of the things that I heard or was hearing from, we did have a tour guide and everything, but some of the things that he was saying, you kind of dispelled some of those myths today. And I found it very,
like what myths? What myths?
Like the thing about the healthcare. You get healthcare, yes, but once you're diagnosed, are you able to get treatment for whatever may be going on? That was one of the biggest things. And then I thought about when Michael Moore said that he took Americans over to Cuba and that their ailments were treated over there. So I'm just wondering, some of the disparity there. But I do know a lot of the money. We were on a cruise, and so we stayed on the cruise ship. We didn't stay at a hotel, but it's good to know that it's better to stay in an Airbnb. And if I have the fortune to go back there, I will, try to arrange an Airbnb type thing and not go with the photographers that just want to photograph, maybe the cigars or the cars.
Okay, who can say how much does a trip to Cuba cost, do you think? What a trip to Cuba costs? That's what we're talking about that now.
Can anyone answer that?
Anyone can answer.
Well, my experience was with the students that I took twice in 17 and 19. So it was basically 9 days. And it was around $2,000, a little bit over $2,000. And we stayed at Airbnbs with families. And it worked out great. And that included all the transportation in Cuba, it included most meals, as well as talks by experts in all aspects of Cuban culture, society, Santeria, Jose Marti, the new constitution from 2019. So it was great because we also heard from the experts in the field.
Excellent. Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I would say that's about right. In the times that I've been and when we took students, those numbers are favorable, and especially if you're dealing with one of the local families, which is what the U.S. government tells you to do instead of a hotel. If you're dealing with one of the local families, especially now with the economy the way it is, it just depends on where you live. So like we usually stay in Havana Viejo, and in that area, you may be able to get a place for anywhere between $15 to $20 a night, and that includes breakfast, food and everything. It just depends. And then like from DC, I've seen prices on the planes as low as $250 to $300 round trip. So, if you're budget conscious, you can do it. The biggest issue for anybody, I would say, in Havana or in Cuba is getting from the airport to the main city. And then everything else is walkable. And taxis are fairly insignificant in price too, in relation to the American dollar.
Richard, may I add something?
Please do.
About certainly journalists and any trip to Havana. Serafin mentioned that he got support from Guyana. He went to Guyana. And we have to remember that all of the countries in the Caribbean, Haiti, Guyana, Jamaica, etc., all a long time ago recognized Cuba. And of course, they never had an embargo against Cuba, etc. As a matter of fact, they have argued for releasing the embargo. And all the CARICOM countries. One of the interesting things to do in Havana is to go to the embassies of some of these CARICOM countries, like the Jamaicans, Guyana, Haiti, etc., and to talk to especially the cultural affairs and the political affairs officers in those embassies about how the Caribbean sees Cuba, how the non-Spanish speaking Caribbean sees Cuba. And I think what you'll find is a huge sense of solidarity, as Serafin saw.
Wesley Givings also said that.
Wesley, yes.
Yeah.
About about how different the relationship is culturally, politically, etc., with Cuba than it is with the United States.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Thank you.
it's fascinating to see that.
Okay.
All right.
I got a message while
I'll
we were.
I'll start a fund for you, Richard, for the trip.
Thank you, Maury. Okay, I got a message from Julio before we conclude. He says, "Sir, send my greetings and successes from me to everyone, and explain to you that where I live, every time I try to access the page to connect with you, the internet goes down. And and if you can, when you finish, tell Serafin to write to me." So on that note, I hope Serafin got that. On that note, we'll conclude. Thank you very much. I appreciate the stimulating conversation that many people have commented on already. As I said, the printout of the chat will be distributed once Zoom sends it to me. And happy holidays to everybody. We'll see you in the new year. So thanks again. And
stay safe, all.
Thank you.
Adiós, feliz Navidad y próspero año nuevo.
Feliz Navidad. Exactly. Thank you. I do know that one.
Feliz fin de año.
Sí, gracias.